Tim, congratulations on your new film, Me, Myself, and the Void.
Thank you, Gig. Nice to meet you.
Hey, it's a pleasure to speak to you about th this film. It's always delightful to see these type of films that are very unique in its own way. But we have to hear it first is where the original idea came from. What dreams or out of body experience that you actually had?
That's a good question. I think on some level, the initial seeds of the idea were that my co-writer and I had worked on this short form project where we had done something sort of similar with like a sort of minimalistic aesthetic in a black space. It was sort of we were using like it was a story about how I had gotten delayed across various like flights, and we were sort of conveying it by having like oh, like we'll put just some chairs down for like waiting in the airport terminal and do the lighting. And so, obviously we were then thinking like, okay, could you do something with that? But how would you do it in a way that doesn't get extremely boring or visually repetitive for the audience? And as you can tell from as I'm telling you that, it's not really a story yet. It's just kind of like that's maybe something we could afford to make. um, and at some point, as we were sort of stewing on that, my co-writer and I got excited by this idea of, okay, it's about a character who is trapped in a void world. And he realizes that he is there because his earthly body is lying on his bathroom floor of like the apartment he just moved into. And something about that sort of made us excited because we were like, "Ooh, now it's a mystery. Now it's a hook. It's like, how did he get there?" And he has to sort of investigate his own. Is it a murder? Is it not? What's going on? And I think once that clicked into place, we sort of felt like, "Ooh, that's a movie. That's a movie," because you got the hook, and then you can sort of get to know the character as he does his investigation. Um, yeah, I think I would say that's probably like the seeds of the idea.
Wow. So one of the most important things for the film like this is to create a production set. And
Mhm.
tell us what was this all on like a sound stage that you actually created? Because obviously the void itself looks like on the sound stage, but I couldn't tell whether
Mhm.
like the other areas, like your apartment and everything else, was also like a replication on the stage.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Thank you. Yeah, it's funny because when we first set out to make this, as I sort of alluded to, the reason part of the reason we got excited was because we were like, oh, this is that contained small indie movie that we can actually pull off. And as we were wondering various ways to take on the void, uh genuinely, I'm not kidding, one of our first ideas was like, oh, do we get a bunch of like trash bags and like staple them all across the walls of an existing apartment and create the sort of darkness that way and like light it. um, but luckily we didn't have to go with that plan because once Echobend got on board, we knew that they would be able to help us get a soundstage and shoot the majority of the film in a soundstage. So I think out of our 15 uh, original production days. I'm not including the pickup that we did afterwards. I think about 12 of our 15 days were on the soundstage. And to answer your question more specifically, yes. So the process was first we built the entire apartment on a soundstage. So all of the scenes in Jack's apartment are a fully built, were a full apartment set with walls that could come out if we needed to get certain shots. And then we basically would take away the walls and all those elements to then eventually create the void, the more minimalistic version of the apartment. But pretty quickly into production, we sort of realized that was going to have to be the approach because it would be easier to build the whole thing and then strip it away as it became the void. Um, that was how we approached production.
I have to love your creativity on this one. And what about the transitioning in aesthetics between the two worlds?
Yeah, I think the transitions were certainly on my mind because as a director, obviously just the looks as well as how we go back and forth between time and when are we I knew it was going to be important to have some visual logic to that. I think the main thing honestly was trying to just have it built into my shot list. Like I knew, okay, you know we're going to whip right here, but then that scene will cut with the thing that we shot a week earlier. So from a scheduling point of view, that was the main challenge. Honestly, it was just keeping track of knowing, because obviously those are shot on completely different days. But yeah, that was sort of those were a lot of those were built in because obviously we wanted to make sure that hopefully it would all make sense and that it would all make sense with the story and that you could track everything that was happening. So we certainly built a lot of time into like the transitions, or how do we get out of this moment, or what is the first thing that takes us out of the void. And funnily enough, it was a lot of very classic filmmaking tricks, like I alluded to, like, okay, we're going to whip pan and then now we're in the other world. Or quite often it was just classic cutting on action, like character turns and then when they turn into the next shot, wow, we've changed the world. Sort of pretty straightforward sort of editing filmmaker 101 stuff, but we think it turned out pretty effective because we've luckily, as we've taken it out to the world, we've not had a lot of confusion. People seem to have like understood where we were, that was my biggest nightmare. I was like, oh, I just hope that it is not confusing, like in a bad way,
With so many moving parts on your production set, did you have to film it in chronological order?
So no, we shot completely out of order. Yeah, like funnily enough, our first day of shooting was actually on a location because the void set was not finished yet. So our first day of production was the stand-up comedy scenes. So funnily enough, one of the first shots we filmed was the last shot of the movie. And for instance, by the end of week one, we had shot sort of the emotional climax of the film where Jack and Mia sit down on the couch and sort of reconcile. That we had shot that by the end of week one. So it was interesting. I actually would say, as a director, what was nice about that was because obviously films are these strange things that are sort of coming together as you make them, and you're having to sort of respond in real time to how the film you're making is developing. And that was an example of something that I actually wound up being quite grateful for, because I knew once we shot that, now I know what the rest of the film is leading to. So then that would sort of inform how we then took on the next 2 weeks of production. Like we sort of, okay, I know that we're going to lead to this moment, so now I can shoot this moment, which maybe makes that moment stronger, or that kind of thing. So yeah, but no, completely out of order. Yeah, we just had to keep track of it, script and tight schedule. And big shout out to my first assistant director, James. He was a necessary guiding hand in all of that.
Well done, well done. Now, on the casting process, how did you end up with the comedy duo Chris and Jack? Were you intending to go with one and realize they were a package?
That's a good question. Yeah. Funnily enough, I would say I was just a fan of them for many years. They have a very successful comedy channel where they make sketches, and they're such talented filmmakers and actors all around. And I'd had the pleasure of working with them on two separate occasions prior to approaching them to do the movie. And honestly, my co-writer and I, relatively early in the process, became pretty convinced that, like, oh, they'd be great. Like, if these two can carry us through the friendship element of the story, and really, we thought to ourselves, like, that would really be something. We had every confidence that they'd be able to like carry a film as actors. And so we named the characters, like in the first full draft of the scripts, the characters are literally called Jack and Chris. So our hope was that we could approach them and really, with a very straight face, say, we wrote this for you, and we hope that you'll take a look at it. And I'm obviously so thrilled that they decided to jump on board.
So how did you know who's going to be Jack and who's going to be Chris when you were writing that script?
I think that was, for some reason, as we were going through it, we did sort of keep that in mind. Yeah, I wouldn't even 100%, because I'm sure that they could both have played each other's characters, but I think Jack sort of managed, and it was interesting because there was actually there was some instincts that we had, that we were like, we're pretty sure Jack can play the comedian, and then Chris can play the sort of supporting friend character who and I honestly couldn't explain it to you other than, like, later we just turned out to be to feel like we made the right choice because there was a nice conversation I had with Jack pretty early where he talked about very openly that like he pretty quickly responded to the character because he understood conflict avoidant people. Like he said, like I was like, oh, I really understand the kind of person who will avoid conflict at all costs, and it like leads to it can lead to these like communication problems. You know, and he and I both talked about that as sort of people who've had to deal with that. And so, you know, we somehow got it right. But the truth is, like, I think it was just an instinct. There was something about those characters. It wasn't overly intellectualized. It was like, it wasn't like we 100% decided, like, oh, yeah, Jack should be this character for this reason. It was just something about it felt right. And I think I'm happy to. I feel like with the results, I'm just so happy. I think we, you know, I'm very thrilled about them and about the cast in general. It's the element I'm most proud of from the film, I think.
I think you've done wonderfully well, especially the fact that how you craft a story, which really was like a battle of the mind itself, you know, trying to figure itself out and
Hmm.
putting the pieces together, sort of like I want to say like a puzzle or something like, and you're just slowly putting the pieces together.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, it was funny because, you know, Nick and I certainly thought about the fact that we were like, well, sort of who's the antagonist? Well, I guess it's himself. And how do we dramatize the process of realizing you weren't great to some people? Like, you know, it felt like one of those things where we're like, okay, this is going to be a challenge, but hopefully we can make it compelling, dramatic. Hopefully there's enough elements that sort of carry the audience through. And yeah, we've what's been nice about so far when people have responded to the story and told us what they think, it's like they seem to have like picked up on all the things we hoped that were in there. So no, I thank you so much for saying that.
So, what was your directing approach to the actors themselves between putting them in the real world and putting them in the void?
Yeah, it was honestly relatively quickly. They were marked that way in the script, but when talking to the actors, one of the first things we had to do is we had to distinguish for all the principal characters. We basically had to say, okay, for Chris, there is real life Chris, the Chris who exists in the memories, and Chris who exists in the real world, and then there's Void Chris, who is Jack's interpretation of Chris. Like it's his a subconscious version of his best friend. And same thing with Kelly, who portrayed Mia. We had to talk about, okay, so there's Kelly, there's Mia, the Jack's ex-girlfriend, and then there's Void Mia, who is how he thinks of Mia in his subconscious. And those two should be like separate characters. And the way we tried to facilitate that was honestly a lot of just conversations. Like we had you know, obviously we talked through it intellectually, but you know, a very pleasant memory I actually have from early in pre-production was sitting down with Kelly, Chris, and Jack, and just talking about what we imagined these different people's like memories of each other would have been, and you know, that kind of classic just kind of unpacking backstory together. And I think those sessions were quite helpful because it sort of allowed us to go, okay, we're pretty sure this is how they feel about each other, but then we also got to, you know, I remember Chris very early said like, oh, I can't wait to spend 3 weeks in Jack's brain. You know, that's sort of how we approached the we made sure that they sort of understood those differences.
So, circling back to the casting, how did you get Kelly then?
Yeah, so we reached out to Kelly through traditional channels. So went through our casting directors, uh, Anna Mayworm and Ashley Dunsing. They Echobend helped connect us to them, and so they reached out to Kelly's team at CAA, and we did the usual. So you know, wrote a letter about why I thought she would be amazing for the parts, and yeah, and then it sort of led to a Zoom, and we talked, got to know each other. We were fortunate to sort of share some mutual connections. So and then yeah, I was just sort of thrilled that she you know, A, was willing to take on such a small movie like ours, but that she, you know, responded to it and then obviously portrayed it so beautifully. So yeah, I think we got very lucky there. Like I mentioned, I think I definitely with a very straight face can say, wow, I got my dream cast on my first movie. Like, you know, it almost feels like a like it's like suspicious, you know what I mean? Like you're looking around like this shouldn't have gone this well. Like everything worked out well on the casting front on my first movie. I feel very blessed.
So this is your first movie. That's quite an achievement that I want to say you really challenge yourself in your how was this overall experience for you then?
Yeah, I mean, I feel incredibly blessed. And like I mentioned, considering that we were entertaining a sort of shoot it on the weekends, Kickstarter, trash bags on walls version of the movie, uh, the fact that, we found ourselves getting partners in Echobend Pictures, Ryan Turner and Zubin Anklazaria coming on to help make the movie bigger than we ever thought it was going to be, which obviously led us to being able to, who gets to cast Kelly Marie Tran in their first feature film. I'm very aware of the fact that uh, I got very, very lucky. And yeah, I think like any filmmaker, we're 3 years on. There's obviously a million things I'm thinking, oh, I would have done this differently, or I could have, But I think I try to look at filmmaking as, it's a marathon, not a sprint. It's
Mhm.
like I now have to take what I learned from Me, Myself, and the Void and carry all of that forward. But yeah, I think for a first outing, I have nothing to complain about. I'm so thrilled to be here, 3 years later talking to you and now sharing it with more people. And I just hope I hope it's is a good time. I hope people can that it's a nice contained 90 minutes, just a good little fun movie which hopefully leaves you with something to think about.
Well said, well said. So what's up next with you? Are you you already have another feature film in mind or a bunch of short films?
Since finishing the movie, I've got a couple of shorts, and that's actually been fun. It's been fun going back to shorts after features, just as like you know, like something that 2 days of shooting and it's done. Um, but but I do have another feature. Yes, I have another feature film, which has currently been optioned by a studio, and we're sort of taking that out to hopefully put the rest of the financing together. And that's been a passion project, honestly, for 10 years. Like I've been trying to make that since before Me, Myself, and the Void. So hopefully that one can come together. But I think we're sort of now in this place where we'll see what comes from sharing Me, Myself, with the Void with the world, and hopefully finding that next opportunity. Because I think we're all just keen to keep growing, and I think that's true for the production company Echobend as well. I think they're just kind of keen to keep doing it, and hopefully, even though it's a tough time for the industry, hopefully we can just find those opportunities and yeah, let's make some more movies.
Well, you've done with a wonderful job with me, myself, and the void. A lot of people will be delighted to watch this and can't wait to see where what you come up with next. So, Timothy, thank you very much for carrying this conversation.
Thank you so much, Kate. Thank you.